Pastor Scott asked me, probably the first part of February, if I'm remembering correctly. He says, hey, I got this Post-it note for you. You want to preach on it? I'm like, sure. So I've been praying about it, thinking about it for the last couple of months, and I'm praying that this is absolutely what the Lord needs y'all to hear. And so he asked a couple of us to preach on how to pray. And Brother Russ talked about this a little bit last week, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more this week to kind of remind everybody. There's different aspects of either remembering how to pray, learning how to pray, or just talking about how to pray. However it needs to be done for y'all. And so we're going to be talking about praying in surrender. And with this, we're going to be in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 39. Let's see if I got my Bible to the right spot. So starting in verse 39, it reads, "And he came out and went as he was accustomed to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, Pray that ye enter not into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, and kneeling down and prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it was great drops of blood falling down to the earth. And when he rose up from prayer, he come to his disciples, and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said unto them, Why sleep ye? Rise and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. And while he yet spake, behold, a multitude that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before him, and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him." So, before we get into this, I'm going to start off with a little story. It's not my story. I can't take credit for this one. I'm going to give credit to this story to Jeff Foxworthy. Some of y'all are already getting pumps primed. And so, what it was, and this wasn't one of his more comedic stories, although I don't think he can ever tell a story without there being any kind of aspect of comedy being in it. And he was talking about how he had gone up into the northern parts of Canada on a caribou hunt. And he talked about the little shack he was staying at by the lake. And he had a guide with him that was this uber super good guide that'd been in these mountains for all these number of years. And talked about how the caribou weren't near the shack, but near a mountain. And he looked at the mountain right there next to the lake. He said, Are they at the top of that mountain? He goes, No, they're at the top of the next one. And so they've been hiking all day and been looking for these caribou. They didn't find any that they were going to shoot. And so he said they must have walked about 10 to 12 miles that day. And on their way back, from the top of this hill, he could look down the valley and see the cabin through this thicket of trees. And the guide was going to lead them around this long way. He says, I could see the cabin right there. Why can't I go down to it? He goes, Well, you could. There's just grizzly bears down there. He goes, All right, well, I'm going to follow you. And so, starting with that, we get into the situations where we don't want to do something. And for Jeff Foxworthy, that's where he didn't want to walk the long way. And we're going to get into situations where the Lord's going to show us something. And well, this passage already shows a situation where Jesus already knew the will of God and was going into it. And so we're going to be a moment where we're going to see the will of God, know the will of God, and we're not going to want to do it. And so I've heard this a lot of days, especially amongst people my age, where they go to pray about the will of God going into something. And they say, God, if you want me to do this, give me peace. And they're not so much asking as peace being the answer, or peace being something that they need in it, but they're asking for peace being the confirmation to do it. And we're not always going to be guaranteed peace, because if you're not wanting to do something, you're not going to be at peace with it. And as we see here, Jesus, when he prayed, he said, Father, let this cup pass from me. And in the next few verses, we see that he was in such agony over this thing that he had to do, he was bleeding from his skin, just secreting blood. And he was not at peace, but he didn't pray for peace. He asked God for his will to be done. And so when we're going into this, when we want to pray in humility, there's several different aspects or several different points that need to be hit to truly hit true surrender in prayer. And one of them is humility. You cannot come to God saying, all right, Lord, I know this is what you want to do, but I really don't want to do it. And so I'm not going to. And so I'm going to ask you to pray for something I know that I'm not going to get. That way I can give myself an excuse to get out of this. And so, because I can tell you something, there's a number of things that I could do that I am perfectly at peace with. And one of them was telling Pastor Scott no 2 months ago. And so, I'll tell you right now, I'm already getting my notes out of order. And so with this, but we're going to be asked to be not at peace. I can tell you a personal story in that I could tell God was calling me to go do an internship in Shreveport. I'd lived at home for 18 years at that point. I had never left the house for more than 5 days. And at that point, I was with my youth pastor and all my friends. And so, but the Lord has called me to say, hey, Orin, I need you in Shreveport for a year, away from everything you know, supporting yourself. And I prayed about it, and I knew I wanted to do it, but there was things happening at home, and I did not feel at peace with walking away. And so I did not do it. And for that year, I was not at peace. I can say that way. I was not at peace because I knew I wasn't where I was supposed to be. And by the time I would have been in Shreveport, everything that had happened would have already been passed. And so it never would have affected my leaving. And my leaving never would have affected the situation. And so for the next year, I was not at peace. And when I finally had the situation, I was presented with that same opportunity again. I said, all right, Lord, I've never done this before. I've never moved out away from my parents. I'd moved several times with my mother, but I never moved away from my family, especially almost 300 miles away. And so I'm like, all right, Lord, I'm going to pack everything I can in the back of my little 2-door sports car and the rest in my grandfather's truck, and we're going to take off. And I can tell you the Lord definitely had this plan for me, because the moment I said, all right, Lord, I'm going to do this, I had a friend call me the next day and say, hey, man, if you're really doing this, I got a place for you to stay while you're here, and rent's going to be cheap. And so that worked out, and I stayed with good friends that were able to strengthen me throughout the year. But for me to be able to do that, I had to be honest with myself and with God. And so that's one of the next things that we got to be. We got to be honest. Because if we're not honest with ourselves and with God about how we are truly feeling in this, we can either, like I mentioned earlier, we can give ourselves an excuse out of it, or we can delude ourselves into thinking that it's not God's will. And someone that we see using this example of honesty with God is David in his Psalms. He talks about constantly and throughout the Psalms where he says, my enemies surround me and I'm scared. He goes, I'm in this place, I'm in this valley, and I've got all these things coming up against me. And I know I've got to face these enemies, but I'm scared. But ultimately, I know you've broken the bow and the spear of my enemy. And so in this, and we see this with Jesus, he says, Lord, let this pass from me. He said, I don't want to do this. Because if anyone knew the pain and the suffering that was to come, it was going to be him. Because even though he was 100% human, he was still 100% God. So in his omniscience, he still would have known what was coming. He knew the pain that was coming that had its own word invented for it. The word excruciating was invented to describe the pain of the cross. He knew everything that was going to come before it and everything that was going to come after it. He says, I don't want this, Lord, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And in this, when he finally relinquished this, I guess, aspect of control. He said, Lord, I'm going to do this because it's your will. We see not so much an angel coming and granting peace, but an angel came and granted strength. In his agony, he was granted strength. Not because he needed peace, but he needed strength the more so that he can put that one foot in front of the other to do the things he knew he needed to do and have done the things that need to be done so that there could be peace. In this, we see something that gets shown time and time again, this strength and surrender. This moment where our will gets put on the back burner so that we can have the strength to do the thing that we don't want to do. I mean, Pastor Scott talked about David and Goliath this morning. We know David had the courage and the strength to know that God was in his hands, but I can just imagine still 12 years old, like, I really don't want to fight this dude that's like 9.5 feet tall. But in the man, he knew he needed to, and he had the courage and he had the faith to go up and stand with 100% pure confidence. I mean, I can just imagine. I will say this. For those of you who know Coleman in here, I have gone at him several times. It's like a bear, like a chihuahua fighting a bear. And I cannot budge that dude. Not at all. And I have 100% confidence that I know he's not going to hurt me too bad. But I've also known him for a long time. And so I knew what he could or couldn't do, and David knew what Goliath could or couldn't do. But he also knew what God could do more so. And so in this, Jesus knew what needed to be done, knew that he needed to go to the cross, knew that the price needed to be paid, and that no one else could do it in that moment but him. And at the end of it, you can't have surrender without having acceptance. You can't surrender to something without accepting the fact that God is going to be in control. You can't surrender to God without accepting his control and his power over the situation. And we see this in the sense of when Jesus came down from the mountain, he walked down, he met his disciples, and he walked straight to the multitude. He didn't go try to hide. He didn't go try to fight against them. And when you look down later in verse 54, it talks about how he let them lead him to the next thing, to the judgment. He let him lead them to everything that would cause for the rest of the night into the next day. He accepted it. We have a lot of people who are easy to say, all right, Lord, let's let you do your thing, and then we run to our Tarsus. We can say something easy with our mouth. I mean, I could say a whole lot of stuff up here, and it means almost nothing. But if it doesn't mean anything unless I actually go and do it. And so, in this, we see Jesus mirroring this, showing what needs to be done in not just our lives, but what he needed to do in that moment. He walked along the path. He didn't fight it. He trusted God, and he used the strength that he had been supplied to see it through to the end. And in this, not just God was glorified, but Jesus himself was also glorified. As we see, and it says Philippians in chapter 2, it talks about how he was obedient even unto the point of death, even unto the cross, and in that his name was lifted above every other name.
Amen.
Just imagine had he never surrendered. Just imagine if he never said, "Thy will be done." What if he just said, "Man, this is for the birds," and just walked down the mountain and went on about his way, and just lived out the rest of the life he would have had without ever going to the cross? Told those Pharisees, "You win." Told the Romans, "You win." How many times in our life have we looked at our situation and said, okay, you win. I'm not going to Shreveport. All right, you win. I'll go do this that I know I'm not supposed to. All right, you win. I'm not going to go and fulfill this role that the Lord has called me to. How many people would have been doomed had Jesus said, you win? How many people do we doom when we say, you win, instead of I surrender? There's going to be too many times where we're going to walk out in prayer, walk to God in prayer, find ourselves alone with God in prayer, just in agony saying, God, I don't want to do this. Don't make me do this. And it's going to cost something. It is. For Jesus in this moment, it cost him his life. It cost him the pain and suffering that led up to it. For others, it may cost less than that. We are called to surrender. And it could be for the fact of if something needs to be done and he wants us to do it. It could be for our protection. The very thing that we don't want to do could be the very thing that protects us from those grizzly bears. The very thing we don't want to do could set us apart so that we don't end up in failure later on down the road. Amen. That we don't fall from where God wants to point us to. So we don't miss the people we could have helped. So we don't doom the people in our past, so we don't doom our children, so we don't doom the generations after us from our unwillingness to surrender, from our peace that we get from holding on to some semblance of control. Jesus went into this prayer knowing the answer. He didn't come and say, God, show me your will. He said, Lord, I know your will, and I'm going to do it.